We are live. Welcome to Strictly Sports Podcast. We got some good stuff for you guys today. It's primarily, again, NFL as we're getting closer to the playoffs. Thank you again for subscribing to our YouTube and following us on Facebook and Instagram. Be sure to share it if you like what we're putting out there for you guys. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well as our website. So we're gonna jump the show off tonight with some college football selection talk, and it's something that we were a little bit. I don't think we talked about it last week on the show, or even maybe the week before, but we had alluded to the fact at the previous Clemson Notre Dame matchup that, specifically me and Aggie kind of felt that Notre Dame would not be able to put the kind of performance they put up the first time when Trevor Lawrence was back. And that's kind of what happened. It looked like you guys tried to scare us a little bit there by saying like, "Oh, watch out!" Like I think Notre Dame got up 3-0 or something early, and then Clemson pretty much dominated the rest of the game. So I'm going to kind of give Aggie the floor here, actually, to kind of say how he feels about first of all that game, and then maybe talk a little bit about the seedings.
Yeah, so going into it, after the first game, I thought Notre Dame would, just based on how they played, overall, I felt like they probably would give Clemson a little bit better run the second time. I definitely thought Clemson would win. And I had, from the outset of the first game, thought I was of the opinion that with a healthy defense and with Trevor Lawrence in the lineup, that Clemson was just definitely a markedly better team and would have no problems winning that game. But I did think after watching Notre Dame in that first game that they would at least be competitive in the second game, even with Trevor Lawrence, and that just didn't happen. So, hats off to Clemson. They just, played a great game and just thoroughly dominated in all phases, and clearly showed that they are, one of the top two teams in the country, and that's why they got moved to number two. And then I know I'm kind of curious on the rest of it after we watched on Sunday afternoon, after everything else shook out the way it did. And Ohio State, handled their business. So they did what they had to do. It wasn't a really impressive win, 22-10 over Northwestern. It was kind of a ho-hum game, in
It
my
was
opinion.
it was actually a pretty good game, I thought, for the most part at the beginning. Like it was a pretty close game, well
Yeah,
fought, at
close
least for the
in
first
that
three
in that
quarters.
manner. Yeah, I meant from them performance wise. I didn't think Ohio State looked phenomenal. Like, oh, this dominant team that they're definitely in the playoff. And I don't know. So, but when everything came out Sunday and we saw the four teams, so it was going to be Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame. You know, there was a lot of different opinions in the media and just in the sports world. A lot of different coaches. Obviously, coaches are always going to try to lobby to get their team in and all that. But what were y'all? I want to know what you guys thought about how they ranked the top four and what the teams were that got in the playoffs.
I didn't have a huge problem with it. I know some guys on this podcast were pretty irate about Notre Dame getting in, but do you really think Texas A&M is like their resume was like a lot better than Notre Dame's or better at all, or that Texas A&M is some better team or some other team is better than Notre Dame? I get Notre Dame, they got smashed in the title game, but I think there's one thing to keep in mind. Trevor Lawrence doesn't play defense. Clemson clearly adjusted in all phases of that game to put a complete performance together. Notre Dame's to come in and just be like, well, see what would have happened if Trevor Lawrence was there. They gave up a bunch of points. Clemson gave up a bunch of points to Notre Dame in that game. That has nothing to do with Trevor Lawrence, unless you're in a game where the offense is going 3 and out and giving the ball back. Clemson wasn't doing that. Clemson's offense under the young kid that came in, the freshman, they came in and scored enough and sustained the ball, and the game went to overtime. So I think it's important to remember that. Important to give Notre Dame, still give them, yes, not full credit for beating the number 2 team as they stand now, but still a lot of credit for going in there and beating that team, even with a backup who wasn't a bad backup.
Well, they also were missing a couple of defensive
That
players
being
too,
said,
Yeah, they were hurt on defense.
if you give Notre Dame credit like they should, a legitimate amount of credit like they should for that game, and then they've got one other ranked win against UNC, a team that's ranked now, which is UNC. And I looked at Texas A&M schedule. They beat Florida, and they have no other ranked wins. So it's a pretty even schedule. You kind of go eye test a little bit, and I see no reason why Notre Dame shouldn't be the 4th team. And obviously the other 3 kind of to me were locks. I mean, yeah, you could say Ohio State only played 5 games, but 6 games including the title game.
Yeah.
But what are you really going to do? Ohio State, who they expected to be, who's a preseason top 4 team, you have Justin Fields coming back from what they were last year. And this year, with the way the schedules were and some teams playing a little bit of games, it was always going to be, yeah, it's based on a body of work. But since the bodies of work for some of the teams were going to be smaller than others and just smaller in general, you were going to have to do some eye test / what did we expect the team to be at the beginning of the year was going to be factored in even more so this year. So I don't really have a huge problem with the way it played out.
Yeah, me personally, I'm in favor of Dabo Swinney's coaches poll he put out. I don't know. I feel like somebody who has of his caliber, who has played against certain teams, and has obviously can evaluate talent and know and really is able to kind of look at like the team's strengths. His top four has Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Texas A&M in there, which I don't know if he's just like an Ohio State hater.
Well, but you know what that is, right? That's him basically saying no team with 6 wins should be allowed in. Well, that's the only argument you can make is they haven't done enough because they haven't played enough games. That's not Ohio State's fault. They didn't make that decision.
It's not. And I don't actually have an issue with Ohio State getting in. It was funny that Dabo put them at 11. I almost feel like, why would you give them fuel for the matchup when you know you got to play them? Like,
I know.
Which is kind of stupid because in college football, I think that stuff does matter. But I think that, like you said, it's not Ohio State's fault. They played the games that were put before them. I think I heard that there was even some backdoor stuff where they were trying to schedule more games if they weren't going to be able to meet the threshold. So you can't fault them for not getting them to play enough games just because the Big Ten, kind of penalized them by starting them in October. But what I will say that Dabo does have a little bit of good standing on is that he doesn't like the fact either that they're going to be a fresher team because they've only played 6 games, whereas the rest of these teams have played 10 or so games and they're going to be beat up and they're injury ridden, and Ohio State hasn't had to really deal with that. So that does, I think, give a slight competitive edge, but I'm more so upset about Notre Dame getting in. And the problem is I don't have a solution to make it better because, like you said, Trav, I don't know that Texas A&M really is going to be that much better. The problem is that I don't think there's a team out there that's a good 4th team that could even give it a competition to Alabama.
Right. So your argument essentially is I just don't think Notre Dame's that good.
I don't like that. I don't like that Notre Dame. That's got what in I was going to ask. I think they got in by their name. I don't think they got it necessarily by their resume.
Well, they beat Clemson one game this year.
Yeah, but
they did. Without a home team, we saw how that shook out with the healthy team,
and they didn't have Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, you two on the bottom there don't think that win was worth anything. When me and Dan give it,
that's not true. I think that's a quality win.
Some level of respect.
I do 100%. I believe that's a good win, but. Yeah, but I'm kind of with Juddy in the same boat, but I'm like also, I don't necessarily think that there's another team that I would definitively say has a better resume than Notre Dame. So
the backups at Clemson are as good as as starters at some institutions.
I would not have had a huge problem with Texas A&M. The only loss they had was Alabama. They did play, like you said, Florida was probably the only other ranked team that they played and they beat. And then they had to run the SEC, which obviously is not that good this year, as it usually is. The LSU, Auburn teams that aren't really that good, but they still won those games. They played who was in front of them, and they beat everybody except Alabama. So Dan, that's not necessarily.
Let me ask you, Dan, what you actually think, because you kind of went down the Dabo Swinney road, like you kind of like what he did with putting Ohio State down there. Who would your 4 be then? Would you have do you agree with that and really think Ohio State shouldn't be in?
I think that either way, somebody's getting penalized. Like, who knows what would have happened if Ohio State played a full schedule? Maybe they lose a game, and then we look at Texas.
So who would your 4 be then, Dan?
I think Texas A&M has to be in there. Their only loss was Alabama.
Yeah, their only loss was
over Ohio State, just because of the number of games.
See, I think that
Dan, what did you say about Texas A&M in Alabama?
I said Texas A&M's only loss
was to Alabama.
Was Alabama.
But who did they beat? Though is I think what you got to look at.
And I get that, but
who did Ohio State beat?
Right.
Yeah,
Ohio State beat Penn State, a crappy Penn State.
Way less games and a crappier
Ohio State was
schedule,
also
probably.
undefeated, though. They have the undefeated. They have that going for
against
them.
crappy competition.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I get that too.
A short amount of games. That's
fair.
That's fair, Dan. I can't argue with that.
My thing too is that I think Notre Dame. I think Texas A&M playing it through the SEC gauntlet. Texas A&M playing through an SEC gauntlet, which regardless of a down year or not, SEC is always the best conference in football, and I think sometimes ACC can kind of compete, but regardless of that, they played through that whole conference schedule and they only lost to Alabama. Well, yeah, they got beat pretty bad by Alabama, but I mean Notre Dame's only really big win. Like you could say North Carolina, but I'm not a huge believer in North Carolina in general. I think they're just that.
Here's my issue with you guys taking issue with Notre Dame beating Clemson. Clemson backups are as good as some teams' starters. That's how deep their roster is. So when you don't give them the credit, like, oh, they played against some of the backups, they played
Yeah,
against
but
the
their
backup
backups,
quarterback.
Dan. Their backups being
They're
as good as
good
some team
players.
starters. That's fine. That's just mean that's just saying
You're
that
just-
Notre Dame
you're
beating
just
up
not-
on like a non-ranked team is not is a big win.
To
which
me-
is not.
So
Hey, the
you're
way I-
telling
the way
me
I saw it-
Clemson with a couple of backups is not equal to some of the competition that
No,
Ohio
that's what
State
you just
beat.
told me. That's what you just told me. Is that their backups
You think Clemson
are as
with
good as starters
backups-
on other teams? You're not saying that their
No.
backups. You're telling me that Clemson's backup players are as good as like a top 10 team.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll
I
tell you
definitely
this.
believe
Let's
that.
look at Ohio State, though. Let's
I
look at Ohio
disagree.
State and who they beat. They beat Indiana and Northwestern. Those are the two good wins they had, if you want to call them.
Yeah.
Is Clemson with backups better than Northwestern and Indiana?
Absolutely, every single time.
I would probably agree with that.
With
Yeah,
just a
I
few
would say
backups,
that.
with a 5-star
Yes.
backup quarterback.
Yes.
And I mean,
100%.
they weren't decimated by like
Right.
COVID or something like Baltimore.
Yeah,
versus
I get
Pittsburgh.
that,
but
There
I'm
was
not-
a couple of injuries. Every team deals with injuries. The big deal was Trevor Lawrence. That was the
Of
big
course.
deal.
Yeah,
And
but
their
here's
backup
my
was
thing
not
is-
that
here's my
bad, and
thing.
They scored a bunch of points. Notre
Right.
Dame outscored Clemson. They didn't lose because
No, I do think
Clemson
that
couldn't
the
score
defensive
points.
guys missing was a big deal too. Though there was like three
Yeah,
of their
three key
good
starters.
starters that were out. For
It was
that
a-
game.
it was
That's every
game
team-
that
that's
was
every-
early
that's
in the
every
year,
team any
yeah.
given week.
Well, we could talk about it for a while. I think we all agree. Like, I think Trav's the only one that actually likes the four that are in, and I think me and Aggie and Dan think that either Ohio
I have
State
a
or
quick
Notre Dame
question.
shouldn't be in.
Why
I
couldn't
think
the
it's fine. I don't have a like I said. I don't know that you can pick one that's really better. You know.
Yeah, I mean,
Why
here,
couldn't
listen,
the competition committee for 1 year, just for 1 year, say we're going to do 8? Listen, if it's
I hope
unprecedented
they do.
times,
even
And
6.
you're gonna want 16. I'm fine with.
I'm not.
Somebody's
I'm
always
not.
getting left
I'm
out,
fine
no matter
with
how
it.
many you do.
Who
Somebody's
wants
always
more
on the edge
teams?
that gets left
The
out. and
people
gets
that
pissed
want
off.
more
Everybody's
teams-
always whining about a team getting left out, no matter how many teams there are. Dan.
Listen,
I like
we
They
it.
did that with the NCAA
we see this
tournament.
in the NCAA tournament, right?
Right, and
But
there's
the problem,
still somebody get
but
left
the
out.
64
Like,
you
wasn't
know why
enough
they
for
added
right,
extra
68,
games?
and now
Listen,
somebody
it's
else
money.
gets left out. Like,
Listen,
It's
I'm
money.
just gonna
That's
say
why they
this.
won.
I'm just gonna exactly, and I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna piggyback off of one of our viewers who basically said that it's all about the Benjamins. When the close
That's right. It's
when
money.
the teams draw the TV ratings, they're gonna get the nod, and that's to me that I don't like that because of their name and their history and their pedigree, supposed pedigree. Notre Dame gets the nod over a Texas A&M who just doesn't have the draw. They're not the flashy
Ohio
team.
State gets in over Texas A&M.
I mean, Ohio State. We all know that they're at the top of the list for getting in by name. It happened.
Absolutely.
It happened when Penn State got jobbed out of their chance to get into the Final Four
Yeah.
a few years back. But
taking records out of it, and like Trav talked about the eye test, do you think Ohio State is probably one of the best 4 teams in the country?
Yes.
Probably so.
How about this? Why not have
That's
a
why I'm
playing
not upset
game
about
for
it.
those final 2 teams? The teams that are up
Well,
against
you
you.
got
I'm just
too many
saying.
You're
Come
getting,
on,
you're,
man.
getting, you're too much of a free thinker there, Dan. We're gonna switch over to
He's
NFL.
just
So
spitballing
before we
it.
get
They
into,
could make
into
so
some,
much money.
before
I
we
can
get
help
into some
them, Brad.
other
I can help
NFL
them make
stuff,
some money.
before we get into the rest of the NFL stuff, we're gonna talk first about the Chiefs Saints. What ended up being a pretty good game. Drew Brees looked pretty bad the first half, but they did make that a game. I think they had the lead at 15-14 at one point. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, Trav, I know you and I talked about it a little bit, and you were pointing out the fact that you can give Mahomes 12 series, and he had
13
only
possessions.
only had
Yeah,
5
they had 13
scores
possessions.
and 5 scores.
Yeah, they had 13 possessions. They only allowed 5 scores. I came out of the game really impressed with the defense from the Saints. I know it's like, well, they gave up 32 points and they lost. But if you really watch the game, I have not seen Mahomes in his career be flustered and had 2 or 3 clean shots taken at him like he did. I haven't seen that in his whole career. I know he hasn't played in the league that long. But to see him just get clean shots taken on him, be actually sacked twice. I don't know the last time he was sacked twice. He was just flustered. They had him. I know they were able to move the ball some. But you give, we all have talked about this. The way you beat the Chiefs is you hold the ball, try to limit them as few possessions as possible. To me, that number is like 8 to 10. You got to keep them under 10 possessions if you're going to beat them. They gave them 13, which is on the higher side of NFL game, and they only gave up 5 scores. They pressured him the way they did. They hit him the way they did. I think they forced a turnover. I don't know that for sure, but they just looked really good on defense. The problem was their offense was atrocious. I know he's coming off an injury, and I hope it gets better for the Saints' sake, but I've never seen Drew Brees look that bad. I don't know what he was doing out there. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't 100%. Maybe he wasn't. He was scared to sit in the pocket longer, so he was just trying to get rid of it. But if they could have done anything on offense in that game, they could have won that game. And it does at least give me a little hope that if because that was my Super Bowl pick, the Saints Chiefs at the beginning of the year. If it did come down to those two in the Super Bowl, and Brees is firing, they get Michael Thomas back. He's back. A few games after the injury, they get things going again, get him in rhythm. It gives me hope that maybe they could, it would be a really good Super Bowl, or that they could give them a good run and maybe beat them in the Super Bowl if it happened.
Yeah, I mean, just while we're talking about a little bit of Super Bowl preview, I do want to let you guys know that there are some early talks that are going to try to do a pregame show for the Super Bowl that morning live. So look for that in the future, as well as our playoff previews that we're going to try to do as well in the coming weeks. But yeah, I mean, I watched pretty much the whole game from start to finish. It's rare that I get to watch a team other than the Steelers play from start to finish without having other stuff going on. But it was a good game to watch. I kept waiting for a moment where Mahomes and them were going to kind of take off and kind of blow them in the dust like they do to most teams. But, they never did. And all I can say is that at the end, and I made this comment to you guys on Marco Polo, that, they're the one team that no matter like what happens, if they get the ball back and they need one first down, like there's just no way that you're going to stop Mahomes. Like he always gets that first down that he needs. When they're within a possession and having that lead and they're trying to hold it, he gets the first down and they trust him to. There are not many teams that are going to put the ball in their quarterback's hands there. They're going to play their defense. They're going to run, make them run clock, but they don't play that way. I mean, Andy Reid just doesn't do it. He knows he's got Mahomes, so.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what that game looks like, in Kansas City. Obviously, the Saints came off of the really bad loss to Philly, motivated. So from Sean Payton's perspective, he has to be happy with the way that they responded. And I'm wondering, I agree with you, Trav. I was surprised at how much the Saints were able to get after Mahomes, like how he seemed to not be able to go to his first read most of the time. He had to really work through his progressions. And I think, that says something. Obviously, the Saints have good cover corners. But it also makes me wonder what happens if Cam Jordan doesn't get ejected out of the game.
Yeah.
Because, I think that was like a big part of it. And, Drew Brees coming back from his injury, that was the reason why I didn't, we talked about making picks on that game and why I couldn't see myself taking them with Brees trying to come back, trying to feel his way out of an injury. So my thought is that it would be awesome for us to see that as a Super Bowl kind of matchup, and with Brees getting back from his injury, with him getting in the flow of things, because Drew Brees did this to Peyton Manning when they won their Super Bowl. He can hold the ball. He can play possession. He can dink and dunk. He can be very efficient, and he can keep somebody like Mahomes off the field. And if that defense matches what they did in this game, which I think will be hard, obviously the Chiefs can go back and look at tape and everything, but if they can hold them down as well as they did, I could see the Saints getting a victory. I just couldn't see them in this game getting that win with Brees coming off of their injury.
Yeah, I think it's just unfortunate for them, that they just had such an offensive struggle. And like Trev talked about how good the defense was, and they did look great. And I heard someone talking on NFL Network the other day, and they were like, yeah, the Saints, they played really well defensively, just not quite good enough. And I'm like, no, their defense actually held up there into the bargain. And if their offense could have just stayed on the field a little bit longer in the first half specifically, like to keep the limit, like Travis said, limit the possessions, and then, maybe generate a couple points here and there on offense, their defense did exactly what they needed to do. They got off the field and they pressured him. They made him fluster. They made him turn the ball over. They hit him in the pocket. Like, they did everything. Yeah. And their offense hung him out to dry, basically.
How often have you said that about the Saints and Drew Brees era,
Yeah.
I mean,
not often.
It's it's something like you said, Dan. It was a slow start the first half, but he did get it going in the second half, and they showed promise, like we've been saying, that hopefully, if this is a rematch, like of a preview of the Super Bowl, then it'll be at least a good game to watch. There was some other good stuff that happened in the AFC. The Dolphins did take care of business, so they're setting themselves up to continue to control their own destiny. They had a big win over the Patriots, and they got to go play Oakland. So if they can beat Oakland, it sets them up for a must-win game against the Bills in the last week, when possibly the Bills might, be on the verge of possibly resting players, since the second ranked team doesn't get a bye. So there's a lot of crazy scenarios that could take place in the AFC with these teams getting in and out, and a couple that I just found out today just by messing around with the playoff generator. But what are you guys kind of looking forward to most in the AFC side to kind of see what plays out over these next 2 weeks?
I think first of all, we had a comment from a Facebook viewer who was just celebrating, said go Dolphins, and two wins and they're in. So got some support on the viewership there from Tommy D.
Dan's Dolphins.
That's right. I think that's the most interesting thing for me. Who's going to get in the final couple spots? I think Indianapolis has kind of solidified themselves as the 6 or 5 or somewhere in there. You know what I mean? So I think we know they're going to make it in. The Browns are definitely in.
That's not
So
true, Dan. I'll respond to that in a second.
The Browns are not definitely in.
I will respond to that. Continue.
Okay. Well, I think the Browns are definitely in personally. And then, so I think really what we're looking at here is it going to be the Ravens? Is it going to be the Dolphins in that final spot
So
in the AFC?
Dan, what if I could tell you that there's a possibility that it could be the Ravens and the Dolphins in that final spot? So I was messing around with the generator today. So I was kind of, and we're gonna get to the Steelers unfortunately in a little bit, but I was messing around with.
We are.
I was messing around with if the Steelers lost out, right? Like say we lost out and the Cleveland wins that division, just to kind of see who would play who, because we already obviously have a playoff spot locked up. But I was messing with some things, and I was like, okay, so let's say we go 11-5. The Browns go 12-4. They win their next 2 games. They win the division. We would bump down to the 5 seed. We have the tiebreaker over the Ravens, so on and so forth. So we would.
Right.
Anyways, I started messing with other things. I was like, okay, well, what if we beat the Browns, but we lose to the Colts? So if we beat the Browns and the Browns fall to 11-5, and we win the division at 12-4, the Browns would then be in a tie at 11-5 with the Ravens, who have the tiebreak on them because they swept them. If Miami beats Buffalo and wins their next game, they would win the tiebreak over. So the Browns would be on the outside looking in. Because if there's a 4-way tie,
that would be the most Browns thing ever.
Dude, it would be so unfortunate for them because they've had such a good season. But I was looking at it, and I was like, I didn't even realize there was a situation where they could legitimately be out. So, and I told Travis, I said, a lot of this depends on what Buffalo wants to do. If Buffalo wants to rest their players and let Miami get in the playoff, if Miami wins this week, of course. If Miami wins this week, they control their own destiny. And if Buffalo rests their players in Week 17 against Miami, and Miami wins that game, then Cleveland is going to be in a must-win game Week 17.
Buffalo's not going to rest. Let me answer that for you. Buffalo's not going to rest their players. They're going to have a chance to lock up the 2 seed. I know that doesn't mean as much because there's no bye week, and the home field advantage isn't really much this year. But I just don't see Sean McDermott. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy. If there's something to play for,
no, this is implying
the guys that need rest will rest. The guys that are banged up will rest, but they're gonna play. I'm not saying they're gonna win.
No, this is implying
guys.
that Buffalo already has the 2 seed locked up because we would have already lost to the Colts. So they would already.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Let's say Dolphins win that final week and the Bills lock up the 2. They would play the next week in the first round again.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't.
They wouldn't be 2v7.
No, they would play the Ravens. Miami would play Pittsburgh.
The Ravens would be the third team of that 4-way tiebreak. They'd be the third.
Miami takes it. I think based off conference record, and then Tennessee and the Colts are really just fighting for the division. The other one, there's a chance that they could play each other in the first round in a lot of these scenarios. So it'll be interesting.
I feel like that year that Philly and Dallas played in Week 17 and then played the wild card the very next week.
There's a lot of those that could actually happen because we could play the Browns back-to-back weeks. We could play the Colts 2 times in 3 weeks. But
so Indy has Buffalo beaten Indy this year? Or they have the head-to-head tiebreak? So you're saying Buffalo would have.
When I looked at it, Buffalo would have already had the 2 seed, even with a loss to Miami.
Even if Indy wins and could win, and then have Buffalo lose and get to they would have the same record. So I'm assuming Buffalo must have that tiebreak.
Yeah, I'm assuming they do too.
And am I correct in saying that only Pittsburgh can take the 2 seed away from Buffalo at this point?
That's only if they lose and we have a better record because they have the head-to-head, obviously.
Gotcha. Yeah.
No, Buffalo was to lose.
Buffalo could lose out. Yeah, Tennessee
could lose out, but
Tennessee or the Colts, whoever wins out.
They play the Broncos this week, which were
No, they already beat the Broncos.
My bad. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry.
They play somebody else that's weak, I think, though.
There's some good ones, but so I know we don't. I don't know that there's much need to talk about it, but we are going to talk about the Steelers. They looked awful again last night. Dan's really the only one that wants to talk about this, so I'm going to let you kind of talk, Dan, and then if we have anything to rebuttal, we will. But as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to talk about because we talked about the exact same stuff last week about how awful they were and they need to fix it.
Well, my biggest thing is is righting the ship, right? So as a Steelers fans and even as is there a chance? So I'm thinking back to the year Philly won the Super Bowl. There was this moment in the season, right near the end of the season, where they kind of went into this offensive slump. I don't know if you guys remember this. They played Oakland on Christmas Day and barely got out with a victory, like 17-10 against a horrible Raiders team that year. And they kind of slumped until they got to the playoffs, and all of a sudden they turned it on. And I'm just wondering, is there a scenario that you guys can see where the Steelers are able to do that and actually turn this thing around? Is it almost a benefit to the Steelers that this is when this is happening So they have, I mean, maybe obviously it's the lowest point of your all season. You won 11 in a row. So the only place you really had to go was down, but losing to Cincinnati was rough with a backup quarterback. But is this almost a blessing in disguise to have this moment happen now and maybe have an opportunity to right the ship and maybe do something so that when you get to the playoffs, you're not having this happen there. The only place you guys have to go up now is up, really.
Yeah, there's no blessing in disguise from the embarrassment that was last night. I don't think that, but I get your point. You know, it is important. You know, they always talk about when teams are going undefeated, like, oh, you want to lose a game. You know, you want to lose one or two. You want to.
I don't feel that way at all. But.
And it makes you more, you know, have more urgency about your weaknesses. When you win, you know, your weaknesses are just your weaknesses. And then when you lose, it's like, oh, we have to be better at them. So I don't know about as bad as it's gotten now on offense. I don't think that's a blessing in disguise because there is going to be some serious confidence issues. There are going to be some serious questions and hardships in getting the ship righted on how bad it is now. Yeah, a little adversity is good. Offensively right now, this isn't adversity. This is an absolute embarrassment on offense.
Disparity.
I don't know what I watched last night from Ben. He played atrocious. I've never seen Ben play that bad in the whole time I watched him play. I've seen every single game of his career. I can promise you that from start to finish. I've never seen the guy play that bad of a game. I don't know what he was doing, but I'll say this about it. The last 2 weeks have the offensive problems and how bad it's been the last 2 weeks. This has been probably a 5 to 6 week problem since the Dallas game on offense. This has been a problem. The last 2 weeks are on Ben. Previously, it's on everything else but Ben. He was playing well in spite of all that going on. The overall issue to me is offensive creativity and play calling and offensive line.
Yeah.
Now Ben has to be better because last night he missed some throws that could have changed the game early on, and he just didn't do enough. He turned the ball over. He probably should have had 3 or 4 picks. He only had 1. So he's got to be better, but I'm not really willing to say like this is all on him. The long-term problem of the Steelers offense isn't on Ben. To me, we got to get better play calling. We got to get the worst thing about it is the frustrating thing as a Steeler fan is we continue to roll the ball out every week and do the same thing. Dink and dunk, try to take some deep shots. We're doing nothing. The defenses know what we're doing. We continue to do nothing different. There's no, we had the jet sweep going early, but like there's no, reverses, gadget plays,
right?
Any sort of creativity. There is absolutely
play action deep ball.
It's literally just classic drop back and throw.
For 2
and
seconds,
I want the ball in Ben's
do a
hands
bootleg, do
because
something
I think
like,
he can still swing. But we've got to, from the play calling standpoint, and the preparation standpoint. This is on Randy Fichtner, the O coordinator. This is even on Tomlin. How can Tomlin sign off on a game plan every week that he's going to obviously have to sign off on from the O coordinator, and they get together and they make the game plan? How can he sign off on this being our game plan offensively every week? And don't give me this BS about, well, Ben's changing the plays and he's trying to take over. I don't buy that crap. I don't buy that Ben's coming to the line and just saying like, nah, I got this. As bad as it's been for the last, few weeks, he thinks that that's going to be better. No.
So let me project
creativity. Early on, the offensive creativity was a problem, and then when we went and put it in Ben's hands, it got better. Now that we're doing that, they know like the teams are preparing. Like, okay, just wait till they go no huddle, and this is what they're going to do. So now we shut the first thing down because there's no creativity and there's and there's bad play calling, and then we know when Ben puts it in his hands, this is what they're going to do. So now there needs to be a third layer that you think in the last 6 weeks we would have gone to, but there's nothing. It's just we continue to like beat our heads against the wall, and nothing's going to be different. And if they don't do anything different, they're going nowhere.
Yeah, we saw it last night. We saw it last night, and they even called it out on the broadcast. Like, if you watch the DBs, they're just sitting at 5 yards waiting for the little short pass, and then they break it up or they tackle them for 2 or 3 yards, and that's just they're not moving the ball. They're doing, like Trev said, they're just beating their heads against the wall. They're doing the same thing over and over, and it's not changing. Like, the defense knows.
It's a bit of a joke at this point. I mean, every person in media and analysts and even casual fans are just like, Steelers are one and done. Like, why are they even in the playoffs? They don't even belong to the playoffs, which – I mean, it is what it is. I mean, we had a comment from a viewer who, he asked the question everybody else is asking, like, can they even win a playoff game? And it looks like they don't have the effort. It looks like they almost like they got through the 11 games and then they lost the game. And now they're like, okay, well now crap. And I was telling Trav, like, I thought yesterday in the first half when Ben looked as bad as he's ever looked in his career, that it looked like he was pressing. Like, he was like, I have to do everything. I have to do this. And it caused him to make mistakes. He was missing reads. Like, I don't know if he has that that nerves on him now where it's like, okay, like, well, if I don't get it right, then we have no shot. But I'm starting to think that, like, it's just,
I'll say this to your point, Dan, your question that you posed was, do you think they can get it fixed? After watching last night, it's hard for me to believe that it's fixable, because if it was fixable or that there was any signs of life, you would have been able to beat Cincinnati or at least score points on Cincinnati. Yeah. We really couldn't muster up much against them.
That was the get right game.
It was supposed to be.
And to see that not happen, then it's like, well, if we can't get it right there, how are we going to get it right? I would still say there's a chance that they can get the ship righted enough on offense. We're not talking about a team that needs to score 30 points a game. We got a good defense, and the defense did not look good last night. But for the most part, this defense has looked really good. Let's get Robert Spillane back. Let's get Vince Williams back, and they'll be even better. They'll be able to maybe create some more turnovers and win games. We only need to be able to win games, score 20 to 24 points and possess the ball a little bit. It's not even just about the points. It's about go out there and get some first downs to give your defense a break and be able to possess the ball and score in the low to mid 20s. And we can make a deep run in the playoffs doing that. Obviously, when you get to the Chiefs, that might be a different story. But at least you're in that game and you got one shot where you only need one real good offensive performance against them. So it's doable because we don't need 30 points a game. But after seeing last night, that was when I kind of just threw my hands up like it's not going to get any better.
So with AFC contenders, teams that are in the playoff mix, you got obviously the Kansas City and the Bills that are, we would all agree that they're above the Steelers right now in the pecking order of sorts. But for considering, Oakland, Miami, Ravens, Browns, Tennessee, Colts, do you still put the Steelers in that mix, or do you think that they're below those teams now, as far as ability to win a game? The only team I actually think we have a legit shot to win a game against right now playing this kind of football is maybe Miami, because their offense is not that great. But then you got to look at their defense, and it's would we even be able to score 10 points?
I mean, we have this thing that we do, and when we watch this whole season from beginning to end. If I look at the whole season, earlier in the season they beat Tennessee, so I have to think that they could still beat Tennessee. I think they could still beat
at that time though.
He was.
There's no way to know. There's no way to know who they could beat because they're capable. They have the horses to beat anybody.
Right.
They beat anybody.
They have to get it together.
If they go on
outside of Kansas City, I think
if they go and play the way they did the first 8 games on offense, they can beat anybody with that defense doing what it can do. They can beat anybody. But it's hard to believe that they can do that. So it all depends. It's not about the other teams. It's about the Steelers. The only team I'd say it's about the other teams, some will be the Chiefs. You might need some help to beat the Chiefs. Yeah. But they're capable of beating any other team if they play their game. I
got a comment from a fan, and I think this is worth touching on real quick. But they were saying that they're convinced that Ben's arm is not right, that they're not really throwing the ball deep, and that last night they didn't really see any zip on his passes. And so my question is, and this is specifically for you,
we got
Johnny,
NFL scouts out there that are judging zip on the ball now.
Yeah, man, we do.
Okay,
but for the sake of this conversation. But I want to ask Juddy this because I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, but I think it's worth talking about. You've been the number one critic outside of Snoop Dogg on Randy Fichtner. What if, and when we've talked about Mike Tomlin being this really good coach, right? And I think if Tomlin thought that Fichtner was the problem, he wouldn't have a problem kind of saying, hey, you're not really doing a great job. We need to look somewhere else. What if what they're doing is because Ben truly doesn't have the arm that he had before, and this is what he is now, and they're just really protecting him from himself?
I mean, I don't know. I told Trav, in a side conversation that, I thought maybe at the beginning of the year they were running this dink and dunk offense because they didn't want to press on Ben's elbow. They didn't know what they were going to
I think it's more about protecting Ben in general.
Yeah.
Getting the ball out so he's protected from any. Look at his knee. His knee got hit.
There's rumor mills talking, people saying that he has a torn meniscus, but he's not saying anything. I don't know if I believe any of that.
That's not what this is about. He played fine when he went back in the game against the Cowboys. The game that his knee got hurt. He didn't go out of the game and he went right down the field.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like that there's other stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know as well. I think that I don't think that Randy Fichtner is going to be sent on his way, sent packing, because he has that tight relationship with Ben. And I think that there are partial blames that go to Ben and Fichtner for the offense, and obviously Tomlin because it comes from the top down. But I don't know. I mean, the only thing I'll say is he's
not going to make a change in year, Dan.
No,
to your
point,
it's
not going to.
He's not going to make a change in year. I think Fichtner will get fired at the end of the year.
His contract,
regardless of the relationship with Ben.
Yeah, wow, I agree.
Very fair.
Well, here's the thing.
Hot take.
If you can look at the stats, I'm not going to go into it too much, but you can look at the stats. He's been our coordinator for 3 years, and our offense has been really not that great for 3 years. I mean,
2018 we were pretty good his first year.
I get last year.
2018
but 2018 we still ran a lot of Todd Haley type stuff in 2018, but
maybe.
And I think we had better personnel. We had Bell, we had AB.
Yeah. We didn't have Bell, but we had AB.
But I will say this, as we wrap the normal show up here for YouTube purposes, I will say this, that the Saints in 2009, They started the season 13-0. They lost 3 straight to end the season, and they won the Super Bowl. So there is hope. There is some hope to be had for Steelers fans out there if you're listening. I don't have much myself, I'll be honest with you. I'd be lying if I said I did, but I'm hoping that maybe one of these next 2 games we find a way to win, and it would be nice if it was this Sunday so we don't have to worry about it against Cleveland to lock up the division and just see what happens in the playoffs.
Hey, look, one last thing to say to you guys, too, about this loss. And then you probably won't take any comfort in it, but maybe it wasn't the worst. Maybe it wasn't the worst loss of the week. Okay, remember that the Rams lost to the Jets this week, too.
That's true.
They did.
That
and
is
then
true.
the Jets lost to themselves by losing Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
But that wraps up our normal show. We are going to stick around.
And Greg Williams won.
We are going to stick around live for a little bit, but thank you guys for joining us. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or just watching the YouTube playback, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate it and hope you guys join us again next week. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the NFC. The Rams are that team that we kind of all have kind of flirted with, like, oh, they could be an elite team, they could win the NFC, but like after that loss, like how do you? I mean, I say that, but like I don't know, how do you lose to the Jets?
I was gonna say I don't know how you lose to Cincinnati with the
I
Packers.
was thinking the same thing.
Sorry.
I was thinking the same thing, but like, I mean, honestly though, like, how do you? I don't know. I don't know what that looks like to lose to the Jets. Like,
It looks like the Rams. I don't know. I mean, but look, I think we've all been saying that this whole year about the Rams. It's like in the beginning, we're like, they're fake. They just beat the NFC East. And then like they go beat the Packers, right? Then they beat the Packers. Is that like the really good win they had?
I think they beat
or the Seahawks.
They
one
beat
or
the
two.
Seahawks maybe, and then they beat the Rams like back to back.
And then they lost to the 49ers when they were all beat up. And then it's like they can't be. They're just back and forth. They're wishy washy. Like they don't know if they're a good team or not. I think they have this talent and they just don't show up every week. I don't know.
I just don't feel confident about like
I feel like they can
Seattle,
beat anybody.
Russell
and they can lose
Wilson.
anybody.
Russell Wilson can't stop throwing picks this year. Like eventually that's going to cost him in a game that matters. Aaron Rodgers I mean, like their offensive performance this week on Saturday was pathetic.
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad
Panthers,
he did that.
like, that's what they do, though, man. They did the same thing with the Jaguars. They let these bad teams just hang in.
It's truly the Saints and then like everybody else, in my opinion, really on the NFC. Maybe somebody gets hot at the end of the year and makes a run, but goodness, like
I think we're gonna.
I don't believe in anybody.
We're gonna
on
see.
The NFC
we're gonna
side.
see who Green Bay is when they play Tennessee this week. If they're gonna solidify that.
I think they're gonna get punched in the mouth.
I don't know. I think
they might too, especially on the running game at least.
I think Henry's gonna have a day, buddy.
And they might. They're going to outscore. That game will probably be a shootout. You got to figure if Tennessee can keep the ball away, which they're capable of because Green Bay is soft, and obviously Derrick Henry and the Titans have one of the best running games in the league. They know what they've been doing for a couple of years now, running the ball. So it's going to be interesting to see, can they keep Rodgers off the field enough, and then can the Titans at least get a couple stops? Because I don't know if they can. So they might not win the game, but Derrick Henry's going to punch them in the mouth.
Yep, I like it.
Is. I think that game could be in the 30s on both sides. Just back and forth. Rodgers is going to have a day. Derrick Henry might rush for 200, 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, I like Tennessee. One of our viewers from last week, actually, I want to bring this up, said that we were sleeping on Tennessee last week. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit.
I know I want to like them. Like I want to say like, hey, they can make a deep run. Their defense is probably worse than it was last year, and it wasn't.
Yeah, and they were relying on their
defense
defense for the last few seasons. Like the last few seasons, the defense has been pretty solid. Like they just, this year they're just not good.
No one's to call it solid, but
I mean, there was like 1 or 2 seasons in the past 3 that they were like pretty good.
I think they lack a significant pass rush is the problem.
Yeah,
like you know what I mean. If they got a pass rush, it probably would hide some of the deficiencies on the back end, but they can't get there, and so
how many teams really have like a really dominant pass rusher though? Maybe a handful.
I mean, there's
like a Saints showed a pretty good one.
Decent amount of. I mean, some teams just benefit from having a good D line usually. Like you usually don't have like that great edge rusher, but you have a great D line because usually when you talk about the top,
your whole line can get some push.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's gonna be interesting. I'm really excited personally for the AFC just to see how it plays out because when I was messing with that generator, the amount of different outcomes of who could play who in the first round, like it's usually at this point with 2 weeks left, you usually have a general idea of like, okay, they're the 1, they're the 2, they're probably going to play them in the first round, they're going to probably play them in the first round, but it is so wide open. Like I really want Miami to win out just to make it interesting because if Miami loses this week to Oakland, it pretty much solidifies the 7 teams that are going to be in for the AFC.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
want them to win
'cause they
because
have to win out.
I picked them to do it, and
You want to prove
like
Trav wrong? I get
it's
it.
well, no, it's not only that, but it's good to have fresh blood in there. Honestly, like no offense, but like I'm kind of sick of. I mean, it's good to have fresh blood. It's good to see the Bills in there winning the AFC East. It's good to see the Pats out. It's nice to see the Dolphins rebuilding. It's good to see like Tennessee in
Cardinals
there
are
and
in there. Yeah.
Cardinals are in there. So like I like seeing some teams that are kind of getting better. And I think what the Dolphins are doing is really showing people how to build a team. They're building the lines out first. Yeah, they got their quarterback, but they went defense first. They built out their offensive line. They can run the football. They just got a 100-yard rusher with like a 4th-string running back that nobody knew about last week. So
yeah, the NFC East, kind of the whole speculation we had last week pretty much died with the Eagles losing, and their hopes are pretty much done. The Redskins won.
We're not out of it yet.
I mean,
Every team is actually still in it.
technically, yes. Trav just went.
This week we'll
not
solidify.
live.
Hey, we
Trav went
did have
offline there.
we did have a viewer
He'll get back.
ask
He's
about
back.
what we thought about Jalen Hurts and how he played and like that whole situation. So I have a lot that I could say, but I'd actually rather take more of an objective view on it from you guys and what you thought about his performance. And
I will say this: aside from his performance, I want to mention, since we're on the topic, Carson Wentz. It was hilarious to watch the countdown on Monday Night Countdown when Adam Schefter and Booger McFarland were going back and forth on if Carson Wentz was in the wrong, basically, for like expressing his desire, and Adam Schefter was like, he didn't say that. He's like, it was people around him, like, you know how it is, sources, and Booger was like, yeah, but if he's letting that out and he's letting people, his sources and friends say that, and he's saying to them, it's like it's still coming from his camp.
You know what was funny about that though? Wasn't Schefter the one or one of the ones who broke the news?
Yeah,
he was the original.
So you're the guy who breaks the news, but then you basically almost make it sound like your report's illegitimate, being like, well, he didn't say that. He just, some people around him said that he thinks it. And it kind of goes to show you what a joke these sources and these reports are. And I don't know what Carson Wentz thinks, but I don't believe any of this stuff where it's like sources say Carson Wentz will not be a backup. And it's like, says who? Okay. Nobody wants to be a backup. Everybody would have some level of frustration. So it's like, what do you mean by that? And so it's like almost like Schefter's being like, yeah, I'm going to have to put reports out because that's my job. But I'm even going to admit on air that it's BS and that none of this stuff is necessarily like black and white, clear cut true. And what I say isn't anything necessarily that the guy is definitely saying and is putting out there publicly, or is even something he's thought. It's like I say, it's like a game of telephone. All right. With these sources stuff, Carson Wentz might have told a guy who then told a guy who's close to the organization who then ran to Adam Schefter. And it's like the game of telephone where like maybe Carson Wentz was like, man, this is really frustrating, and I don't want to be a backup. And then this guy says, oh, he's basically saying he won't stay in Philly if he's a backup. And then this guy's like, oh, he wants out of Philly. And then he goes and he's the guy that knows Adam Schefter. And it's like, I don't buy it, man. It's I always go back to Ian Rappaport said back in 2012 that Ben wanted to leave the Steelers and go play for Oakland.
I'll say this.
What? Yeah, who in their right mind would want to leave the Steelers and go play for Oakland? That's the most ridiculous report I've ever heard. Too. And that's when anything that comes out of Ian Rappaport's mouth, I don't even give it any credence to it at all.
So I will say
you might want to go there right now and play for John Gruden.
Well, no, I will say this. Listen, so I think that, and this is my conspiraciness popping out, but I think that the ESPN, I think that Schefter, obviously he works for ESPN. I think that they basically tell him, like, hey, I need you to dig up some stuff that we can use to make stories, to make headlines, because we need something to talk about. Because, here's the thing. I'm serious. I think that they were like, hey, these
reports that come out, they're not even news. They break stuff that sounds like news, but it's like if you really listen, sources say that, like Le'Veon Bell, for example, 2 years ago, sources say he could return as early as week 8. You're not telling me anything as early as, or it could be this.
And
if you break the report, you don't use the word could. That's not a report.
I think they use it as talking points because they wanted a talking point either one way or the other. If the Eagles won that game or if Jalen Hurts played well or poorly, they wanted to be able to use that and go back and say, well, we know earlier we heard the report saying blah, 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 and after today's performance, it looks like Jalen Hurts isn't going anywhere. The same thing happened with Ben. They said it right before, literally Sunday night, it came out like, sources are telling me that Ben Roethlisberger plans to come back for 2021. They wanted to use that as a talking point to talk about whether he played good or played poorly the next night.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what they did. They said, well, now after seeing how he's playing, it doesn't sound too good that he wants to come back next year.
And
it's
didn't
like,
that work out perfect? And didn't
them-
that
for
work
their
out
Yeah, it worked
narrative.
out perfect for them.
Because of
Yeah.
the game he had Monday.
Exactly.
Now they could go back to that report just like you
Mhm,
said.
That's
It's
what I'm
like,
saying. I think it's all
Schefter
planned.
Maybe the
reported
Steelers
yesterday
don't
he
want
wants to come
them,
back for
though, yeah.
2021. Did you see the way he's looked the last 2 games? He needs to get out now. And then it's just this whole, and it's just
It's
like,
just a media
that's
cycle.
not news.
Yep.
Yep.
But
Saying
anyways,
Roethlisberger plans on
It's
coming
just
back for
amazing to me
2021
that
is not
Juddy
news.
came the whole way back to Ben Roethlisberger. We just talked about him for 20 minutes.
Yeah, he
That's
pulled
very-
Danny
We
right
had to
there.
talk about
That's a
it.
very Hummer comment.
Very-
I'm trying to
He
talk about
pulled-
my
he
Eagles
pulled a
here.
Dan right
Dang
there.
it.
Very
Yeah, I
relevant.
know.
About
I
his
know. I had to
team.
call him out on it.
very relevant, Dan. But I think Jalen looks good. I'm very happy with how he's
No, he
looked. I
does.
mean, you
The
figure it's his
offense-
first 2 starts. Like, he's looked comfortable. He looks like a leader. He looks like a guy that they want to play for, and that matters.
Yeah, the
That matters
offense-
in the NFL.
The other guys on the offense just look like they click better with him. Like their offense just looks like, I don't know, they just look like more cohesive as a unit than they did with Wentz. It's just, like, I mean, we kind of talked about that last night on Marco Polo. Like, Trav was like, man, this looks like the freaking Carson Wentz Eagles right now. Like, that's what it
Yeah,
looked like.
watching the
I mean,
Steelers
like,
game.
yeah, and they switched to Hurts, and it's like, everything clicked, and the offense is just going now. So, as a Cowboys fan, I wish Wentz would come back.
Do they not like playing for Carson Wentz because Carson Wentz is a racist? Is that the reason why?
This is a strictly sports podcast. Johnny.
Was that a thing?
No, remember,
Is that a thing?
No, not at all.
But-
What was the thing about he doesn't trust his receivers? What was that whole thing back earlier?
That was
in the season?
Alshon Jeffrey leaking stuff to Josina Anderson, like about stuff, and then saying that he didn't do it, but everybody
There's
knows.
some like he didn't want to throw the ball to
Well,
receivers.
I feel like
because they didn't do
Booger
something.
McFarland last night was trying to hint at that. He
Yeah,
was just
that's what I
basically
was
saying
getting
like
at.
he was like, you don't see him going on the sideline and doing the handshakes. And when Jalen Hurts, he had about 20 handshakes with 20 different guys, or he came up the sideline. I saw 2 handshakes with all these guys. He was like, there's a divide there between Carson that there's not there with Jalen Hurts. And, you can kind of think like what he might have been thinking about that. But no, the funny thing is maybe Max Kellerman was right. Maybe Max Kellerman was right after
That's
all
what it
last
was.
year when
Kellerman
he
said
said
that.
because of Carson's poor leadership, that caused receivers to drop balls.
passes.
And so now they're catching the passes from Jalen Hurts because the leadership's better. That's maybe Kellerman was more.
First of
genius
all,
than we all
I'll tell
thought.
you
Hey,
why.
look, has Aguilar been having mad drops in Oakland?
I'll tell you what. He only had 1 in that game against who was that game? The Chiefs. They should have won that game if he would have called it. But listen, I think that just in general, Jalen Hurts has like put the ball where receivers. He's thrown guys open. They haven't necessarily gotten any more open. And the second thing is
His
he's more
accuracy is-
accurate than
yeah.
he's more accurate
Yeah,
than
his
Wentz.
accuracy, man. Because Wentz, we've talked about that. I mean, to no end this year about Wentz. I mean, just watching some of the throws he makes, you're like, where's that ball going? Like, But yeah, Hurts is putting him on the money, man. He's doing what he's got to do.
Yeah, he's looked pretty good, but yeah, I mean, I think that's all we got for the show today. We've touched enough on Dan's Eagles and the piss poor play of the Steelers, but
Do want to say one thing? We have our faithful Cowboys fan viewer who says, "Hey, if the Cowboys win out and Washington loses out, we win the division."
Aggie, hold on. We
true.
should do an on-air bet here.
Oh,
I have
Lord.
another box of Martin's potato chips. We can put on the line for.
If it's for the Cowboys to win the division, I'm not taking that back. 'cause
no,
I
it's
don't
for
care that.
Cowboys versus Eagles this week, man.
Oh boy. If Carson Wentz was playing, I would take that bet.
Oh, no, you won't do it. Is your Cowboys fan? Is that Puddin?
yeah, Puddin.
Yes.
Puddin.
Yeah.
I just want you to.
He's
see
the
for
ever
record-
optimistic. He's the ever
that-
optimistic, and I'm the ever pessimistic.
Yes, I see that. He's the alter ego.
Yeah.
You are the Cactus Jack to his dude love right there.
That's it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
You could have got a. You could. Well, I'll be eating some Martin's barbecue potato chips during that game, thinking of you.
Why don't you send me my box first?
Pay up.
Well, we'll see.
Pay
see.
the piper.
Shipping's a little expensive right now during the
I'll
holiday
take him.
season.
I'll take him next time up. Next time up.
All right, I'm
All
gonna
right.
cut the stream there, but thanks everybody for joining us, and look for us again next week, same time, same place.